people. It's us.
Hi, I'm Connor, an Irish writer in Berlin, and so am I. And in this video, we're going to look at Naomi Klein's book, DoppelBANGER, A Trip into the Mirror World. A great expose and analysis of COVID, conspiracy politics, and the weird world of the far-right internet. Okay, so I really liked this. The book is kind of a tale of two Naomis, Naomi Klein and Naomi Wolf. From a distance, it might be hard to spot the difference. They're both white American Jewish women writing from a position on the American left. If you're familiar with anti-capitalist writing, you're going to know Klein. She hit the bestseller list back in the late 90s with No Logo, which I remember reading as an undergrad and thinking was great. She's also written about disaster capitalism, corporate power, and climate change. Her books tend to mix on-the-ground reporting with good theoretical grounding and a sort of curious, roving intelligence. This book starts about kind of one thing and then goes off in lots of really interesting directions. And I'm not going to spoil them all here, but just that it was really fun to read. Naomi Wolf isn't as big a star, but she definitely used to be. If you've taken a kind of intro to feminism course in the past 20 odd years, you've probably seen her book, The Beauty Myth. It was published back in '91 and kind of catapulted her to superstardom amongst the white liberal feminists of the States. She ended up marrying one of Bill Clinton's speechwriters and was an advisor to Al Gore briefly. Her kind of relevance had dwindled over the years, but the big humiliation came relatively recently when in a radio interview it was revealed to her that the research and the conclusions behind her new book were total bullshit.
And this corrects a misapprehension that is in every website, that the last man was executed for sodomy in Britain in 1835.
I don't think you're right about this.
The moment went viral, Twitter piled on, and she was kind of exiled from public intellectual life. Klein writes about how the two of them were constantly mistaken for each other. They would be tagged in each other's posts, or people would refer to one when they actually meant to refer to the other person. And this is kind of annoying, but mostly harmless for Klein, until after Wolf's humiliation, she goes through some personal crises, and then COVID hits. And Wolf becomes a kind of superstar in the far-right conspiracy space. The book, at least for the beginning sections, is a pretty gripping kind of almost thriller, almost horror story. The world gets shut down because of the pandemic, and Klein seems to spend all of her time on Twitter watching her other half, her doppelganger, just get more and more deranged and more sucked into what Klein calls the mirror world. The kind of parallel reality that so many people online inhabit. A kind of cartoon Halloween scale where the Chinese Communist Party invented COVID and 5G's turning the kids trans. For Klein, this triggers a kind of identity crisis or brand crisis. She's forced to think about the role of counterparts, counterfeits, other halves, and she uses this trope of doubling, of imposters and twins to investigate the weird funhouse optics of online life in general. And to go even further, she gets a lot of mileage out of these doppelganger tropes, and she's able to, as the book goes on, it gets much more complex and much more ambitious. She's able to kind of diagnose Western civilization, Western progress more generally, using these essentially psychological or psychoanalytic tropes. And the book is kind of a thrill ride, actually. And as someone who is quite online, it was really refreshing to see a robust, sober, anti-capitalist perspective that is also rooted in the essential weirdness of life lived on and through the internet. And there's a lot of good stuff here. I'm not going to spoil everything, but I just want to highlight a few things in the book that I thought were really good and really resonated with me. Klein spent a lot of time thinking about diagonalist politics. Now, what are diagonalist politics? The term was coined relatively recently, and it describes a political trend that has been brewing for a while, but as with a lot of things under COVID, became accelerated. The concept basically describes a political rearrangement, whereas it's commonplace to think about the political spectrum as a sort of horizontal line running from left to right and populated along the spectrum by people who share certain values or policy positions. But what diagonalism describes is this shifting of constellation that we're seeing where people on the far right and people on far left parts of the spectrum end up merging in kind of strange new movements. So examples of this might be the queer Danken movement, which sprung up over COVID here in Germany, in which we saw white supremacists and anti-state monarchists protesting in the same space with people who normally vote for Die Linke, the left, or the Greens. Klein is quite careful to actually describe it not as being the far right and the far left, but the far right and the far out. People who would identify as being sort of new age, who might in normal circumstances vote for parties on the left or for like progressive or environmentalist parties. You've probably seen this phenomenon described in other terms like the wellness to far right pipeline or granola fascism. And this was like super clear during COVID where so many big health and wellness or fitness influencers very quickly jumped on board the sort of anti-vax, anti-lockdown, anti-mask train. And it's pretty like well-documented phenomenon. And Klein is good at reminding us that this isn't new, that something like Nazism had a really strong New Age component to it. And that underneath these smiling influencers who seem to care so much about our spiritual health and our mental journeys, there lurks ideas that in the right circumstances can be triggered and can morph into a fascist mentality super quickly. You know, ideas around purity or a distrust or opposition to conventional knowledge structures or conventional medicine. In the creator space, there are also kind of like selfish and economic incentives to this kind of thing. It's very easy to get very big on the internet, ranting about the elites and masks and lockdowns. We saw so many grifters during the COVID era. Klein is also really good at unpacking something that I noticed during the pandemic. How quickly the gym rat community online turned against health restrictions of lockdowns and vaccinations, etc.
Like the mainstream media is not on your side, bro. They really don't want us to win, fam.
And there is again an economic incentive at play. Like a lot of these people who were, as Klein calls them, body people, find that their places of business or their professions were like suddenly under serious threat. And that provoked in a lot of them a kind of panic, a kind of breakdown. But as Klein points out, very correctly in my opinion, underneath fitness culture, no matter how aspirational or optimistic or motivational it finds form, like on our feeds, there is a kind of disavowed darkness. There are these feelings that pop up every now and then of shame, rage, disgust at bodies who are imperfect or not optimized.
I'll smack your fat ass. So you're gonna...
A lot of these big fitness influencers are, if we were to really like drill down underneath them, motivated by these like ugly, unresolved feelings of like shame or kind of self-hatred. And what happens is those feelings tend to get projected onto other people, onto the lazy, the fat, anyone who's not on the grind. There's a kind of bodily libertarianism underneath a lot of this culture, a kind of extreme individualism in which you're not part of a kind of like biological or social collective. You're not in this shared space where you might have to take precautions to protect yourself from other people, or you might have to inconvenience yourself in order to care for other people in your community. The self-centeredness at the heart of a lot of fitness discourse encourages people to see themselves as these like independent agents. It's sort of a version of like the free market logic. I think that there was a lot going on during the pandemic, but one of the things that was clear is that it asked people to consider the possibility that they might be vulnerable and they might have responsibilities for other people in their community. People, especially from the wellness and fitness culture, said essentially no. Like, it's your problem. If you get sick, if you die, that's on you. And maybe you even kind of deserved it because you're not like me. You're not grinding at 6 a.m. You're not optimized. And there is like very clearly in here a sort of disavowal of some very basic biological facts that people get sick, people die. You have a frail kind of frame that you walk around with. And you can help yourself, sure, but you're never really in control. And control is what so much of this health and fitness culture is really about. Now, alongside the rise of this mirror world, we've seen a kind of corresponding rise in content about the mirror world. From subreddits for people who've lost family members down the rabbit hole, to video essays, to podcasts, serving up the latest slice of craziness from people on the other side. But Klein is too smart and too structural a thinker just to go for the kind of easy, like, isn't this weird, look at these weird people kind of angle. Klein understands that in the political economy we're all kind of stuck together, and this kind of mirror world conspiracy thinking doesn't just spring out of nowhere. No matter how deranged its form, Klein very rightly points out that a lot of it is a response to actually felt vulnerabilities or anxieties about the world or about economics. Like, you know, for example, there are certain parts of the population, like people of colour or indigenous people or women, who might have reasonable grounds to not believe everything that medical professionals are telling them just based on their own experience of getting bad or biased care. And, you know, in a kind of super complex, opaque global economy, it's easy to feel like your fate is tied up with these kind of like abstract, unnamed forces that you don't know and you can't do anything about. Conspiracy thinking, however like wild it might be, and however much it might indicate like genuine like personality or emotional problems, is structurally a kind of reflection of certain kinds of conditions. And as Klein rightfully points out, a lot of the gains that far-right or conspiratorial groups have made are to grounds that people on the left have kind of ignored or left kind of vacant. Klein says that we have to treat this ridiculousness seriously, and like we have to remember that conspiracy, like so much else, can be considered a morbid symptom of cruel and opaque capitalism. Klein advises us not to indulge in like super simple binary thinking about things like this, but to consider what role we might play in the conditions under which the mirror world is flourishing. She asks us to consider our own places within the global economy, like what kind of horrors or injustices are we not seeing, or are we kind of disavowing? Klein tries to remind us that however sensible or rational or right on you might consider yourself to be, there are also patterns of partitioning and doubling inside yourself that you need to kind of acknowledge and recognize. She asks the reader to be kind of courageous and to build a political economy that actually includes everyone. As the book goes on, it develops from something like very personal into something way grander and more structural. Klein zooms out and out, diagnosing not just the crazies on Facebook, not just the people around her, but Western progress, Western civilization more generally. Inspired by Sven Lindquist's great book, Exterminate All the Brutes, Klein takes a longer historical view and reads the weirdness and the insanity of the current political moment as a sort of reaction or symptom to things that Western democracies have repressed or kind of sublimated. Origin stories of violence and extermination. If the world has gone mad, then what Klein tries to offer is a diagnosis and a prescription. What is needed is nothing less than global structural therapy. It's one thing to compare yourself to your QAnon aunt and say that you're the one who lives in reality, but Klein challenges her readers and asks, how much reality are you willing to accept? Okay, so that's all from me, and we'll see you at the next one.